Happy October. It is October 2nd. It's a Thursday. And I wanted to start today talking about Imelda. That's what you can see on the screen here in this infrared satellite imagery of the Atlantic. We'll touch on the tropics quickly. The East Pacific, potential tropical development there has significant influence on the rainfall forecast for the Southwest. And obviously there's some differences there, as you might imagine, between the European model and the GFS. There's also some differences between those two models with respect to Midwest precipitation chances as we get further out into the 7-day forecast. So I want to touch on those, obviously, considering we have just been bone dry in this region here. This isn't the right map to kind of showcase that, but nonetheless. And then as I get further out into the video, I do want to give I'm going to give an early feel or touch on where we're going in winter of 25-26. I'm going to use last year as an analog. I'll just spoil that. But I also I'm going to pick a fun year from the last 20, because there are a few similarities there, at least juxtapose what we might be seeing this year with respect to La Nina or El Nino and where we're going this winter. I think that'll be fun kind of near the end of this video. To start, I do want to mention Imelda. That is still, I believe, a Cat 1 hurricane as we're recording this video. It didn't quite make landfall near Bermuda last night. That's this little island that you can see here, but for all intents and purposes, the almost the worst effects of Bermuda or of Imelda, you could argue, were felt on the island as there's a lot of convection kind of on the north eye wall that ended up spinning around. I can show you some videos. This one here from Andrew Powell, thank you, on Twitter, showing those wind gusts impacting the island yesterday before nightfall. And ultimately, the storm drifted very close to the island of Bermuda, which is here. It's kind of hard to see underneath that convection, but this is that north eye wall, if you will. So I don't know if it officially made landfall. You'd have to get that kind of eye, that low-level center directly over land, or at least touching it at some point. So very close, but nonetheless, wind, rain, wind gusts recorded up to near 100 miles an hour at the island there. And historically, this island has fared pretty well with some stronger hurricane impacts. So that seems to be the case here this morning. That's obviously what we're hoping for when any of these get near land. If we look at the National Hurricane Center forecast for Imelda on its way, it's going to continue to drift off into the Atlantic, frankly, and remaining a fish storm, unlike some of the previous ones, which went near the Azores or even Portugal. Now, it did have this kind of dance with Umberto. I don't know what else we'll call it. We mentioned kind of the Fujiwara orbiting effect that we saw earlier. Umberto's maybe low-level center at some point got merged or close to Imelda, but kind of the vast majority of that kind of frontal system that is now post-tropical is on its way to actually the United Kingdom and the British Isles. So we'll be watching Scotland. I mentioned earlier this week that maybe Ireland would feel the impacts of that sting jet, but if we jump over and look at the latest European model forecast, it's actually shifted further north. So it's kind of the main area of risk for these high winds, but those have shifted further north over the last 48 hours, near kind of like the Hebrides or the islands of northwest Scotland there. So that would potentially be, I think, let's see, we'll get those wind gusts in Friday of this week here. And these are still strong up near that 90 to 100 kilometer an hour wind gusts here. Actually, let's make those. There we go. Yeah, 170. I was looking at knots there. So you're talking about wind speeds, approaching, you're getting close to about 95 or 100 miles an hour. So impressive wind event potentially for Scotland as we get near the Friday or the end of this week. If we jump over and look at the infrared satellite imagery over the continental U.S., a little bit closer to home, at least where I'm recording this video, it is quiet. There's really not much going on. That's why I started with the tropical look further east over at Imelda. We can see the potential influence of a trough moving in from the western U.S. We talked about that on Tuesday. That's bringing some rainfall there, which we'll look at in just a second here. But otherwise, across the continental U.S., let's kind of zoom in and look at radar. Some light showers, maybe a rumble of thunder over central Kansas, but otherwise pretty clear, save for the Florida Peninsula and that moisture that we saw coming on shore over west, some in Idaho, western Montana, and the Olympic Mountains in western Washington. I do want to mention that something going on that's not obvious on this map here on radar, and that is the low-level winds. And if we jump over and look at those across North America, there's Imelda. I mentioned that frontal system that Umberto is merged into. There's that front right along it. And critically, Imelda is going to ride along that as it heads northeast in the Atlantic. We saw that from the forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Here's our surface low pressure system just off the coast of British Columbia. But it's in between these two features is what I'm looking at. And it's this southerly wind that's being pulled up. You can see it. You can almost draw a line from Corpus Christi or Brownsville, Texas. And you can just see that warmer air being pulled all the way north. Now, it's not particularly moist, and the reason for that is we've kind of cut off the moisture source from the Atlantic. What I mean by that is it'd be hard, it's hard pressed to draw these streamlines all the way back toward like the Caribbean. That air is flowing this way toward the isthmus or down here toward the Toano effect, but it will be warm. So warmer and drier air streaming north, that's going to have impact on the rainfall forecast. But naturally, the temperature forecast is rising for a lot of these areas here. So if we jump over and look at those daytime highs today, mid to high 80s, Minneapolis, Twin Cities, South Dakota, North Dakota, up into the 80s, Chicago, and all the way over to Indianapolis, Michigan, in the mid to high 70s. So a warm day here today on Thursday. That continues even more so tomorrow on Friday. Just jump out into the temperature forecast here, all the way up toward like 90, 94 in Sioux Falls. These are really impressive daytime high temperatures for early October. If you're rooting for fall to come, we're still waiting on it, and we're going to get into that in the forecast, obviously, as well. Some of the showers, precipitation clouds across the southeast Florida. You can see temperatures down there. And then over in California, Nevada, and the influence of that trough coming on shore there, we're going to see those temperatures falling in the, what is a fairly cool day. So there's this dichotomy right between the west and the central part of the country. That's going to be relevant as I get into the winter forecast near the end of this video. Put the forecast out into Saturday. That heat continues on Sunday, starts to lean over, if you will. It's not an uncommon presentation for it. We're kind of leans to the right toward Maine and New England. Those temperatures lingering across the southern plains and Midwest, those higher temperatures. And then those cooler temperatures as that trough moves from west to east, coming down across the high plains and then the northern plains and over the Midwest as we get into early next week, actually waiting on a cold front. Not the big fall cold front that we've been waiting for, but at least we can call it a cold front pushing through early to the middle part of next week, and that's where there's rainfall chances are going to present themselves for the Midwest and the Ohio River Valley. Now, getting back closer to present day, what we're looking at here this morning, we do have frost advisories here, even a freeze warning out for some of the elevation in Vermont, New Hampshire, areas of New York, even that frost advisory down through the kind of Appalachians here in western Pennsylvania. Otherwise, fairly quiet across the continental U.S. We see some flood watches out here in Idaho, but I am looking at those cooler temperatures, and if we kind of refresh this here this morning, see down near freezing, Quebec, even getting closer to Ontario, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, prompting those freeze warnings there. I'm going to look a little bit closer. I'm recording this about 7 a.m. Eastern time, so probably getting these temperatures to warm up a little bit. But boy, there's a 25 degree there up in the Adirondacks, closer to 30 or 32 degrees Fahrenheit near the river there, northeast of Lake Ontario. There's a 32. That looks like a 12. Oh no, it's probably a 42. The 12 would obviously be an error. In the mountains up in New Hampshire, 30, 28, 33 near the Berkshires in western Massachusetts, 33 there, 37 getting closer to frost territory, especially with these light winds. That's what that black circle means, even getting closer to like southern New York. So definitely some cooler frost-like temperatures getting in to some more populated areas of New England here, and then all the way down into Pennsylvania. Again, wherever you have these calm winds, I always worried about frost potential. 41's probably not going to do it, but you start getting to like 38, 37, that concern increases there. So we've been talking about all this warmth, but you can start to find fall, even kind of early tastes of winter if you go searching for it across the continental U.S. And we'll look at that over in the West in just a second. If we look big picture across North America, there's that trough. I was kind of mentioning it, but it's nice to see it in those upper level winds across the western U.S. That's going to be slowly making its way west to east, and there's quite a bit of vigor behind it in the flow coming out of the Pacific, and that's going to give this whole trough system, whatever you want to call it here, a little bit of a kick next week, which is going to help pull that cold front through the Midwest, the Ohio River Valley, and New England next week. So we can already kind of see that playing out here on Thursday as far as where the forecast is going next week. Mention that frontal system, find a front, and I'll show you a decent jet stream above it, and that's the case across the North Atlantic here, where maybe the strongest jet stream we can find is attached to that front out ahead of Imelda there. The atmosphere is congruent vertically. So what's happening at the surface, right, relates to what's happening above it. So that's why we kind of start with the upper levels and work down in some of these forecast situations. This is the 3-kilometer NAM forecast for the radar. Obviously not much going on this morning, but I do want to focus on that low pressure system off the west coast. So take this forecast through today. Then into this afternoon, you can see Sacramento Valley rains into the Sierras here, Klamath Mountains. Some showers there from the 3-kilometer NAM forecast this evening. Really more so this afternoon versus this evening, but getting into western Ohio or Idaho, near the Treasure Valley, northwest Nevada, even over toward like Spokane and eastern Washington here this afternoon. Precipitation coverage perhaps increasing here for Idaho. We mentioned those flood watches out near Boise. This is overnight tonight. Some decent precipitation signals for Nevada, Northern California, western Idaho. And then tomorrow, this is like getting into tomorrow afternoon. Look at across the Wasatch Range in Utah, Nevada, even back into the Snake River Valley now. Increasing in coverage, maybe over the upper Snake River Valley, western Wyoming. Before finally, as we get out further into Saturday, can't get it quite in the forecast yet here, but getting out into the high plains. Let me see if I can refresh it. Yeah, there we go. There's the 60s. We'll take this out just again, see if there's any major differences. Again, increasing in coverage for the Snake River Valley tonight, on Thursday. Even some of this getting down into the Central Valley here. And then tomorrow, more so over Utah. And then finally, overnight into Saturday morning, getting into central and eastern Montana. And then expecting additional showers and storms more so across the northern plains as we go through the day on Saturday. Now, whenever I see kind of a frontal system moving through like this, obviously these don't look too strong in terms of severe weather. So what I'll do, I'm going to refresh this, go over to ag weather. Over one of these systems moving through, go to weather maps, click on that. And I just scroll down to this grid, 1, 2, 3. On the top, this is the SPC, their convective outlook. And then the CPC, different outfit, excessive rainfall outlook. So both under NOAA, but CPC focused on kind of some of these, more general weather events. This SPC focused on storms. Now today they just have what we call we used to call the C text, or just areas where there might be some thunder across Nevada, Idaho. So not expecting severe weather, but we saw that, maybe flooding potential up here near Idaho. So if we look at the excessive rainfall outlook, we see a marginal risk, that excessive rainfall, and then you can kind of go through the next 2 days. This would be tomorrow on Friday and then Saturday to see those areas of focus. So potentially more rainfall, another marginal risk across, arguably the same geography in Idaho, prompting maybe those flood watches there. See maybe an uptick in severe coverage likely, but still on the marginal side. You're still way down on the scale. But then you can see that spreading to the east as we go through the day on Saturday, even up into Minnesota, down through the Dakotas into northern Nebraska. So I kind of always glance at this panel, the start of my morning to see, all right, now give me the next 3 days. What do we have to watch in terms of thunderstorm activity? And then you can drill down in one day to get the better details on it. Okay, I want to jump back. We're looking at the ECMWF forecast at 500 millibars. Not easy to say fast. And what I want to show you is as this trough moves in from the west, the kicker that's potentially going to bring our rainfall to the Midwest and the Ohio River Valley. So I'm going to do this kind of slowly at first. There's that vigorous trough moving through California, comes through the Sierras into Utah. That's on Friday into Saturday. We mentioned the precipitation coverage moving east out into the Dakotas as we go through the day Saturday. That's why we mentioned that potential severe setup, albeit fairly marginal. But look behind our first trough. You actually see another one coming in behind it there. What's plotted here is vorticity or spin in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. As that first low kind of races north off into Ontario, we have this kicker behind it. It's actually kind of has two pieces to it. And this is really our weather maker next week, at least for the Midwest and the Ohio River Valley. So as I take this forecast forward, there comes that big piece. This is now Wednesday, overnight Tuesday into Wednesday morning, pushing all the way east across New England, laying down a front as it goes through. This is now Thursday morning, and then potentially another trough behind it. If you're keeping a close watch, we got a potential tropical system coming out of the East Pacific as well. I'll play this back because we have that first trough moving north into Ontario, kind of gets folded back up into the jet stream level flow. And then behind it, there's these other kickers. You kind of saw them come together. This bigger one here finally on Tuesday and Wednesday. There's going to be a low pressure system attached to this. It's going to bring a cold front. And finally, rainfall chances to this corridor here with some differences between the different models. Also with this kind of vigorous trough going over California, I went and looked for the National Weather Service, the Lake Tahoe, Truckee area forecast, and I could find snow. So again, if you go looking for it, you'll find little early hints of winter across the continental U.S. This is the National Weather Service forecast for tonight. Thunderstorms and then snow likely, and then Friday in the morning rain and then snow showers likely. So kind of neat to see those early hints of winter, even though it's been warm across so many different areas across the continental U.S. here, it feels like. In September, now getting into early October. If we play the ECMWF forecast for precipitation going forward, this will at least take us a number of days out into the future. Kind of already mentioned the rain chances here across the Intermountain West. Those getting out Saturday into the Dakotas, into eastern Montana, eastern Wyoming, southern Montana, even getting up into the Bitterroot Range there. Potentially a little bit stronger overnight, Saturday into Sunday. We saw that marginal risk on Saturday. Rainfall continuing potentially over Florida and the Gulf Coast, kind of right along the coast here. There's actually a very slight chance for a brief tropical development there from the National Hurricane Center, but it's very low at this point. That system moves kind of north up into Manitoba and Ontario on Sunday afternoon. Still some rain coming down in the Dakotas. It does lay down this weak front that's eventually going to get kicked out by that system coming in behind it. And you can see this on Iowa, western Iowa precipitation there, eastern Nebraska. But as this kicker comes in behind it, this is now Tuesday morning. You can see that as that front shifts further east behind this developing low, maybe here like over Ontario. Rain chances increasing across northern Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan. Those increase Tuesday evening. Across Missouri, even getting into Arkansas, albeit a little bit lighter, all the way down to Kentucky, maybe even Tennessee, over into Ohio as we go into Wednesday morning. And then by Wednesday afternoon, spreading all the way across New England, into Pennsylvania, Virginia, all the way over toward North Carolina, with at least a brief but moderate rainfall chance for this corridor here. So it's a quick-moving system. You saw how quickly it was diving out of Canada. But it kind of meets up with that front laid down by that first system and races precipitation chances across the country. Now, over in the west, at least from the ECMWF, we have that additional trough coming in behind this one. That's bringing precipitation chances back to the northwest. Look at this tropical system that the ECMWF develops and just launches right into the lower Colorado River Valley. I'm going to stress that we're well out into the forecast here, all the way out to a week out now, Thursday, October 9th. This isn't, as I sometimes say, you can't draw this with Sharpie. And what I mean by that is, if I draw this with Sharpie, you couldn't change its permanent marker. But it is, we'll kind of pencil it, lightly shade it in pencil that this area here could see increased precipitation chances next week if this tropical storm can bring its moisture plume up into the area. And, I say moisture plume, this is a low down to like 994, 996. There'd be a little bit of wind with this one as well, with this remnant system, if it comes in exactly as the ECMWF says it does. Now, what does this look like on the precipitation anomalies if I take this out 7 days? Again, this quick hitting system, it's not going to be this like widespread heavy rainfall for a number of days, but it is, the potential for like a ½ inch to an inch across a number of areas here, even getting down into the mid-Atlantic. See this area here getting that first low to come through before it raced off into Canada. Some better precipitation chances there. Potential for some spottiness in here as this kind of handoff occurs toward the northeast, but drier over the southern plains through that 7-day forecast. If I take this out 4 to 10 days, get further out into next week, well, here comes that tropical system. Potentially very heavy rainfall over areas of the Colorado River Valley. Again, that's just this one forecast from the ECMWF. You can see the potential chances for some of the Gulf Coast rain here that we discussed as well. Now, I am going to jump over. I want to look at the differences because they're kind of significant between the ECMWF on the right now and the GFS forecast on the left. You're not going to notice too much early on, as they both have a decent handle on this trough and low pressure system first coming out of the elevation of the western U.S. There's that front, the stalled front that we talked about on Monday. That's going to get picked up by the next system coming through. There's maybe some showers, light showers getting into Arkansas and Missouri. This is now Monday evening. But you'll notice the ECMWF a little bit stronger initially with the development of this low with better precipitation across the Midwest. Still seeing it here from the GFS, but it's not quite as filled in. You can just kind of see that. The ECMWF has a little bit more coherent of a low pressure system as it pulls that through the GFS, just a little bit weaker and kind of stalled with that front here across the Midwest into the central or southern plains. ECMWF racing, a more defined low pressure system out, maybe even a little bit quicker. Perhaps some more stalling rains here from the GFS, but they're not much heavier than the ECMWF. And now critically, let's jump back over to the southwest. We do get this moisture plume over some of the, like the Colorado Plateau and the upper elevations here. But because the storm system curves a little bit further to the west, as they sometimes do, at least here on the GFS versus the ECMWF, which is now racing toward the southwest, we don't get that better moisture plume into the lowland or even parts like near Las Vegas. So there's a big difference for the southwest. The ECMWF with a much wetter solution for that corridor getting out into next week, like Wednesday through Friday. And if we compare kind of the GFS 7-day precip anomalies, you can see less rain through the Midwest and the Ohio River Valley with that kind of weaker system stalling out. Less rain in this corridor here if we take it out 4 to 10 days, so getting out into next week. Right, we don't see that widespread precip in this corridor here. Right, over only in the kind of upper elevations of the desert. So kind of a difference of opinion between the two that we'll have to keep an eye on. It does kind of hinge, at least for the southwest, right, on the development of this tropical system that hasn't even formed yet. I haven't been even saying a name yet. We do have Octave here just to its west. This is a tropical storm. That one is expected to continue west before potentially strengthening into a hurricane and then kind of sitting here over the eastern Pacific this weekend. But it's really this next system that has the chance to pick up that tropical moisture and bring it up into the southwest. This one would be Priscilla. So I don't know, there's like an Elvis connection. Priscilla, Presley getting up toward Las Vegas, right? The Elvis up there. I don't know. It's just a thought. ECMWF, if we look at that forecast in the East Pacific, we can see potentially Priscilla developing this weekend into a tropical storm. Maybe even makes a run at hurricane strength by mid next week. And you can see that's a decent remnant low, 991, getting all the way up toward like Yuma, Arizona. This would be a very impressive rare event for mid-October. Again, just one forecast from the ECMWF. If I compare this to like the AAFS, strengthens it near hurricane strength, kind of weakens it before a much weaker system goes over. Let's do the GFS. We already kind of looked at that initially. Priscilla actually kind of Fujiwara's a bit with Octave before staying further to the west, maybe another system coming in behind it to watch. And let's look at the Canadian, just another opinion. Priscilla kind of staying further to the south. So the ECMWF at least kind of on an island there for the southwest, but the chances are there. I do want to look a little bit further out in the forecast. I talked about the kind of cold, if you will, scenario, that first big autumn cold front scenario from the AIFS that we looked at on Tuesday. I've been looking for hints of it since then, and there's still hints, but it's not, I wouldn't say the data has gone headway into supporting that scenario for mid-October yet. And what I mean by that is if I look at the ECMWF ensemble forecast, I'm going to take it out. There's that front next week with the precipitation chances we talked about across the Midwest and New England. That moves through, temperatures warm up. Behind it, we get that trough over the west, potentially bringing disturbed weather back there in the western U.S. late next week. And this was the kind of scenario that we looked at playing out next week, where we're going to get ridging thrown up into the Arctic by the AIFS. And we see it here from the ENS. You can see some ridging getting up in here to the Arctic. The kind of scenario that we talked about was there'd be so much ridging breaking down the troughs and the low pressure systems over the Arctic that it would kick some of this cold air out, potentially into Canada or the continental U.S. And we actually see that initially set up like October 15th. But we're getting toward the end of the forecast period now. And we've actually seen this before. We saw this kind of signal at the beginning of October, and it didn't really play out. But at least it's here again from the ECMWF ensemble, but it's not kicking it out all the way through the Midwest or into the eastern U.S. yet. This is now like October 15th and 16th. This would bring colder air, freezing air into Canada, and at least would set up that potential in October. But we can't keep talking about, setting up the potential. Where's the actual potential for this fall cold front? Now, if we do look at our panel of temperatures going from 5 days out on the left, 5 to 10 days out in the middle, we do see that like the middle of next week, cooling off the middle part of the continent here, at least from the GEFS and the AIFS. The ECMWF ensemble a little bit more moderate with those temperatures, but at least like the middle of next week, if I take this European model forecast out, I'm going to take it to like Tuesday. Let's do Tuesday morning. There's colder temperatures across Saskatchewan, definitely down toward freezing territory, getting into Alberta and Ontario. Overnight lows getting down into the mid-30s, low 40s here. If we go to like Wednesday morning, you can see those lows getting all the way down into mid to upper 30s in Minnesota. So it is going to be cooler. We can take this into Thursday morning, 40s across the Midwest, but you're not talking like a widespread frost or freeze with the cold front next week. So I'm not going to call it that official but big first fall cold front. But if we do look all the way out to that third panel, day 10 to 15 temp anomalies, we do see that cold air really settling in over Canada in a lot of these models. The AIFS has been kind of on an island. It's not playing much of that scenario out anymore. It brings that first cold front through and we warm up too much behind it over the Canadian interior. But at least the GEFS cooling off the Canadian Prairie and the Shield, and the ECMWF ENS going much colder for that corridor here. And it's often the case kind of early in winter, we go colder here and then we spill it out. Now I've made that kind of case already and it hasn't played out. So, let me be a little bit skeptical here that just because we're going to go cold here doesn't mean this has to come all the way through New England. We haven't seen that play out yet in early October, which is exactly why we're still pining for that first big autumn cold front. But it is the thing that we'll have to watch in the long-range forecast. If we look at the long-range precipitation outlook for the 8 to 14-day precip anomalies, with the kind of cold air setting up over the Canadian Prairie, I'm going to look at the ECMWF ensemble because you can kind of see there's that troughing like this in those scenarios, if you saw that or remember it from the ECMWF ENS, and that's going to at least help to bring some flow back over the Midwest in the long range, which is why we see those precipitation chances there. The ECMWF AIFS perhaps has this scenario playing out, but it's later in October, so we're not quite seeing it in the 8 to 14 days. But you do see underneath the influence of that kind of jet stream like this in the 8 to 14 day outlook from the CPC, and they're watching that Priscilla moisture as well near the end of next week, which is still in that 8 to 14 day range. I do want to touch on winter quickly as I wrap up here. I'm going to jump over. We often look over at the West Pacific to kind of get a gauge on the atmosphere. I love when Eric kind of uses that example of that is where our atmosphere inhales and exhales. And right now we still see strong trades along the equator, these east to west winds. Those are a strong trade indicative of La Nina continuing, and these trades help to cool the ocean temperatures here. So that's why if we look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, and that map is very small, we see that cool La Nina signature, right, with those trade winds upwelling the water, keeping the ocean chopped there. But if I look at the sea surface temperature change from 7 days, this isn't the absolute sea surface temperature anomalies, but where have they been warming or cooling? It's been interesting to watch the cooling in the North Pacific. I mean, you can draw this almost from Hawaii up near the Aleutians over toward Canada. So what was a very warm North Pacific, and I should say it's still very warm despite this change, we have cooled down the ocean temperatures here in the Gulf of Alaska. And La Nina over the last kind of 1 to 2 weeks has gotten a bit stronger. Now there are these are really kind of eddies along the equator, so there's some warm spots, but by and large, if you were to average the change in here, it would actually be negative. So La Nina is starting to strengthen here a little bit in early October or late September. So kind of keeping an eye on a lot of this cooling that's happened. This is from those typhoons we saw. We can actually see the wake of Umberto here and then Imelda before those recurved out to sea. So those those hurricanes chop up the water as well and upwell some cooler water. They're also raining on the ocean surface. So we can see the shadows, as we say in the sea surface temperature anomalies. So it's kind of cool to see. But I've been keeping an eye here. That obviously caught my eye with the sea surface temperature change. And we can start to see it showing up even on the absolute map. With cooler waters now settling in here into the Northeast Pacific. Now it's small, but it is a change from where we were at the end of summer. And we still see that kind of La Nina signature here, albeit still a little bit weak, but getting down toward -1 Celsius. And it had me thinking of winters in the past because I've made this scenario even as it relates to that first big autumn cold front. When we get a lot of ridges getting up into the Arctic here, it can kick out some colder air, can disrupt that polar vortex. We talked about that potential. And if we're warm here, we can sometimes kind of get this, what goes down comes up and what goes up comes down. And you can get colder shots in the Midwest or New England when we get really warm in here and help kick out some of that Arctic cold air. Just one scenario to think about this winter. Now, a huge winter, I mentioned kind of a fun example would have been the 13 or 14 polar vortex. I think 14 and 15 saw some of that as well. But I want to focus on early of 2014 because the kind of last half of that winter was just brutal across a lot of North America, at least east of the Continental Divide. And you saw that North Pacific stay very warm leading up to that winter, even warm in the Northeast Pacific where we just recently saw temperatures go over cooler. And so that played out where we had a jet stream diving down like this in the heart of winter, bringing cold air, winter storms, a lot of snowfall to this quarter here. Conversely, despite the little cool water here off the West Coast, California had one of its warmest winters on record. So that kind of up and down pattern is what we see sometimes when we have this North Pacific warmth. Now, this year, we're starting to lose some of that Northeast Pacific warm signature. Is that going to play out and make the winter a little bit different? Well, I actually went back to even this year, January 1st of 2025 is an analog. And there's actually some decent similarities between the end of this year and the beginning of this year. So it's kind of strange to use 25 as an analog for 25, right? It feels sort of redundant, but Northeast Pacific a little bit cooler, still very warm across the broader North Pacific. There's a decent La Nina, but not, particularly strong. And you even have kind of a little negative Indian Ocean dipole, the cooler waters here and the warmer waters here. That's what I was looking at. So if I jump back and show you right now, definitely warmer here in the North Pacific, but still generally some decent similarities here. And last winter, while it wasn't as crazy as 14, was still colder across much of these, especially kind of in the heart of winter. Remember January and the ridiculous cold air and the snow we had all the way down to the Gulf Coast states? Now, I'm not forecasting that's going to happen again. But if we look at December to February temperature anomalies across the continental U.S., right, we see some of that up and down, which suggests, maybe we're going to be warmer here and generally more, active with some of the more intense cold air outbreaks through this part in winter of 25 and 26. It's not a lot to go off right now, but at least it's the early hints that we can put together that will continue to do so as we go through this fall and into winter. But we're waiting on it. When's that first autumn cold front going to come through? You'll have to stick around to find out. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow. Thanks for watching.